Hi, second period. Today we're going to talk about comparing fractions when you multiply. The first thing you need to understand is that fractions are smaller than 1. They're smaller than 1 whole. So think of a piece of paper. If you divide it in half, 1/2 is smaller than 1 whole. So if a fraction is smaller than 1 whole, the numerator, which is the top number, is smaller. So for example, 1/3 is smaller than 1 whole. It means you took a piece of paper and you divided it into 3 pieces. Or 3/7 is smaller than 1 whole. Fractions that are bigger than 1 whole, the numerator is larger than the denominator. So for example, 7/3 is larger than 1 whole. If I reduce that fraction, I'd take 7 divided by 3 and I would get 2 1/3. So notice it's larger than 1 whole. If you multiply by a factor that's smaller than 1 whole, your answer is smaller than the original factor. So for example, when you take 3/7 times 3/4, that means you're only taking 3/7 of 3/4. So because you're multiplying by a fraction that's smaller than 1 whole, your answer is going to be smaller than the original 3/4. If you reverse it and you do 3/4 times 3/7, notice you're multiplying 3/7 by 3/4, and 3/4 is smaller than 1 whole, so your answer would be smaller than 3/7. So you need to understand that to be able to understand the rest of today's lesson. Let's take a look at page 35. Okay, on page 35, let's look at question number 1. Okay, let's look at question number 1. On question number 1, you're having to multiply 3/5 times 1/6. So the first thing you do is you're taking 3 times 1, and then on the bottom, 5 times 6. So you multiply straight across and you get an answer. Then they want you to reduce the fraction. So you need to divide the top and the bottom number by the same number to get the reduced fraction, and that goes in the last box. For question number 2, this is what I was just talking about. So on 2a, notice that 13/4, 13 is a bigger number, so therefore 13/4 is bigger than 1. So when you multiply 13/4 times 5/8, your answer is going to be larger than 5/8, because greater than 5/8, because you're multiplying 5/8 times a number that's bigger than 1. Whereas going the opposite way, when you take 13/4 times 5/8, your answer is going to be smaller than 13/4, less than 13/4, because 5/8 is smaller than 1. So you're going to do that for each question. So you got to think about what number you're multiplying by to figure out if it's greater than or less than. On number 3, same thing. If you look at 4/5 and 3/8, both of those fractions are smaller than 1. So what happens when you multiply by numbers that are smaller than 1? Decide if that is greater than, less than, or equal to. Same thing on number 4. Let's take a look at number 5. Okay, on number 5, we're doing the same thing. So if you're multiplying by a number that's smaller than 1 whole, your answer is going to be smaller than 2/3 or less than 2/3. If you're multiplying by a number that's larger than 1 whole, your answer is going to be greater than 2/3. And if you're multiplying by a number that's equal to 1 whole, like 7/7, then it's going to be equal to 2/3. Number 6 is 6, 7, and 8 are all the same thing. So when you're multiplying, you got to think about what you're multiplying by. If you're multiplying by a number that's larger than 1 whole, your answer is going to be greater than the number you started with. Go ahead and finish all of the problems before you move on to the next part where I go over each answer. Okay, so let's take a look at question number 1. So notice we're multiplying straight across, so 3 times 1 and 5 times 6. So 3 times 1 is 3, 5 times 6 is 30. Now this answer, 3/30, needs to be reduced. So we need to divide by a number that goes into both 3 and 30 evenly. So I can divide by 3, I get 1. Divide by 3, I get 10. So my reduced answer is 1/10. Now on question number 2, When you look at 13 over 4, notice this is greater than 1 because 13 is bigger than 4. So because I'm multiplying by a number that's greater than 1, my answer is going to be larger than 5/8. So that's why it's x is greater than 5/8. But when I go the opposite way, I'm multiplying this by 5/8. 5/8 is smaller than 1 whole. So when I multiply by 5/8, my answer is going to be smaller than 13 over 4. On the next one, 4 over 3 is larger than 1 whole. 6 is also larger than 1 whole, so my answer is going to be greater than for both of them because both of those numbers are greater than 1 whole. On the next one, notice both of the fractions are smaller than 1 whole. That means the numerator, the top number, is smaller. So both of these are smaller than 1 whole. So when I multiply them in either direction, my answer is going to be smaller than what I started with because I'm multiplying by a number that is smaller than 1 whole. On the last one, when I take 5/8 and I multiply it by 7 over 7, 7 over 7 is equal to 1 whole. So 1 times 5/8 is going to be equal to 5/8. When I go the opposite direction, if I take 7 over 7 times 5/8, 5/8 is less than 1 whole, so therefore my answer will be less than 7 over 7. On question number 3, because these are both smaller than 1 whole, when I multiply them together, my answer is going to get smaller. On question number 4, because 8 over 6 is bigger than 1 whole, when I multiply 2/3 times 8 over 6, my answer is going to be bigger than 2 over 3 because I'm multiplying it by a number that's bigger than 1 whole. Let's take a look at number 5. Okay, on number 5. So again, if I take 2/3 and multiply it by a fraction that's smaller than 1 whole, my answer is going to be less than 2/3. When I take it and multiply it by number 8/9, it's smaller than 1 whole, my answer is going to be less than 2/3. When I multiply it by 1 whole, 9 over 9, it's going to be equal to 2/3. When I multiply by a number like 8 over 5, which is greater than 1 whole, my answer will be greater than 2/3. 6 over 1 is greater than 1 whole, so it's going to be greater than 2/3. 2 is greater than 1 whole, so it's greater than 2/3. On number 6, notice 15 over 7 is greater than 1 whole. So when I multiply 3/4 times a number bigger than 1 whole, my answer is going to be bigger than 3/4. But going in the opposite direction, I'm multiplying 15 over 7 times a number that's smaller than 1 whole, so therefore my answer is going to be smaller than 15 over 7. On the next one, because I'm multiplying 7 times a number that's larger than 1 whole, my answer is going to be larger than 7, greater than 7. Because 7 is greater than 1 whole, my answer is still going to be greater than 6 over 5. So if they're both larger than 1 whole, your answer is going to be greater than on both of them. Whereas on the next one, both of these fractions are smaller than 1 whole. So either way, when I multiply, I'm going to get an answer that's smaller than or less than the number I started with. On the last one, when I multiply by 1 whole, 8 over 8 is equal to 1 whole, I'm going to get a number that's equal to 7/10. But going in the other direction, when I multiply by 7/10, I get a number that's less than 8 over 8 because 7/10 is less than 1 whole. On question number 7, both of these are smaller than 1 whole, so my answer is going to be less than what I started with, less than 3/4. On number 8, because 5 over 3 is greater than 1 whole, when I multiply 4/7 times 5 over 3, I'm going to get an answer that's greater than 4 over 7. And on number 9, when I multiply by 3 over 3, which is equal to 1 whole, I get an answer that is equal to 5/9. So the lesson of today is that if you multiply by a fraction that is smaller than 1 whole, your answer is less than what you started with. When you multiply by something that's greater than 1 whole, your answer is greater than what you started with. Email me if you have any questions.